For today's episode of Aggie Allstars, we have the pleasure of speaking to Steve Denise. Steve is currently with Maizex Seeds, but I knew Steve from his days at Bridge Communications. And what I can say of Steve is he is a farmer at heart more than anything else, a family man, and one of the leading agricultural experts, I'd say, in Canada, if not North America. So we're lucky to have him today. And welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Well, thanks very much, Rhett. That's very high praise. So now we got to try and live up to it.
So let's start with because you are like, if I think of people that are like just dedicated to farming and the farming industry and agriculture in general, you are definitely one that comes to mind. So tell us, like, where did that passion come from? I imagine humble beginnings on the home farm.
It is. We grew up. I grew up on our family farm just outside of Chatham, and it was when I was young. It was very interesting. It was no livestock, but a very diversified farm. We grew burley tobacco. We grew processing sweet corn and peas. We grew tomatoes, cucumbers, grain corn. The start on soybeans, and so or the growth in soybeans. So winter wheat. So we were involved in a lot of different crops. My parents worked extremely hard. My dad worked extremely hard. I mean, that was a different era. So it was a lot of manual labor. Like, we're not to give away my age, but we're talking cucumbers and tomatoes in baskets and the like. And so it was, there was a lot of work that had to be done. And that was the farm income. And so, you learn a work ethic that way. And, my dad was passionate about agriculture. He was involved on several of the processing boards and associations and got involved in issues. He was involved in the first crop insurance programs and things like that. So it wasn't even not only production agriculture that I gained a passion for growing up, but it was also, from an organizational support perspective and trying to give back. So that was really the foundation. Plus, it was really cool when you're really young to drive a tractor. So that was also part of it. So.
It's always the things you remember now. The tractor was cool now, but I imagine getting up at 5 a.m. or picking tomatoes by hand, et cetera, in the moment was never fun.
No, I was more involved in the gathering, not so much the picking at that time. But there was just a lot of work, and we still had open station, one cab tractor that wasn't quiet, and open station tractors. So I remember, I was a teenager planting wheat with a parka on, that kind of stuff, right? And keep your eyes straight, and yeah. So it was a different era compared to today.
I say anybody our approximate ages, if you're not half deaf, that's saying something, because the open cab tractor, right? And turn your Sony Walkman up so you could hear that too.
Yeah.
Have hearing issues when you get later in life. But talk to me a little bit about, because you did end up going to school, and you can talk about where you did go to school. I know a couple different schools. Was that a discussion on the farm, especially in that era? Because I do believe you had always intended to go back to the farm or be involved in the farm. So what was that discussion and thought process and decision-making process around you going up ultimately to the University of Guelph?
And it wasn't so much a discussion. It wasn't like my parents said, hey, there's not enough here, you need to go off the farm. It was more a discussion of, hey, you have an opportunity to go to school. We're going to support you, So the decision was to go to University of Guelph and take agriculture. And so that was a tremendous 4 years, an awesome campus, met a lot of great people. Learned a lot. So we did that. And then I had some people influence me when I was done there. And one individual in particular, Joe Dales, and he said, Steve, you should really think about doing your master's. And so at that point in time, again, it was a little different than today, because it was, it was mostly you had to go to the campus. It wasn't like there was any virtual options. So I did my MBA essentially by night school at University of Windsor. And again, that was an awesome experience, because most of the people I worked with had nothing to do with agriculture. And of the case studies we worked on, really none of them had anything to do with agriculture. And so it was a great opportunity to learn, but it was, it took a lot of work and effort and doing it while you're working. And so, I'm glad I got it done before we really, I had more than one kid, and before that child got older. So
Yeah, I know what you mean. Luckily, it was virtual. I was in the first University of Guelph one where I went virtual
I remember that. Yeah.
So what job did you have at the time? Because like you said, that is a haul. Was there separation between when you got your degree from Guelph to Windsor, or did you jump right into that and job at the same time? How did you kind of juggle the career and the school and the family?
Yeah, so I waited 2 years. So I waited 2 years to get some work experience, which I think is what people should do.
Agreed.
Had to take a couple of business courses just to finish up the qualifications I needed, and then we dove right into it. So my wife was very supportive. She was teaching at the time. When I started the degree, we had no children yet, so that made it a bit easier. And I was fortunate that we had a number of people in my class who lived in Chatham and worked at Union Gas at the time. Now it's Enbridge. And so the professor said, hey, you guys do your group work together. So that way we weren't hoofing it every weekend. We would get together in Chatham and do the group work and that kind of thing. And so it was interesting was that, a lot of the projects I did, I tried to tie back at the job. So when I started my master's, I was working with Herx Canada, which was going way back, a predecessor or precursor to Bear. And then I was headhunted, and I took a position with a company called ISK Biosciences. So for the bulk of my master's, I was with ISK, focused on the fungicide side. And I did a number of projects, and the company was supportive, and I did a number of projects that related back to the business. So
awesome. So we'll take a little aside from the career here, because at the same time you mentioned, obviously, you met someone who became your wife and is still your wife, and then started a family. Talk a little bit about that, because I think just for future generations, it's kind of like you were a very busy man at that point in your career, and have always stayed busy. So how did you juggle all that? How did you meet? How did all that happen? How did you figure out the common ground that as far as passion for agriculture and those types of things?
So I met my wife Ann at University of Guelph. So we were the consummate Guelph couple. I was an Aggie, and she was from Family and Consumer Studies, and so we met, and my friends arm twisted me because I was very bashful at the time. So they arm twisted me into asking her out, and I did, and that was that. It was done. So, and
took care of the rest.
What's that?
And then she took care of the rest.
I wouldn't say that, but it was pretty. We enjoyed each other's company. That was the main thing, and so she went through, became a teacher, and she had a busy career too, but she was very supportive of what I wanted to do, and she really liked my family, which was also great, and she understood the game rules going into it. Was that okay? This guy's gonna farm,
Yeah.
And she did have some relatives, so she was not like totally unexposed. She had relatives that farm, but her dad actually worked on a freighter on the Great Lakes, and he was the helmsman. And so the one blessing out of our relationship was that, like in her family, she was used to her dad being away like 8 months of the year. Yeah. And that was just the reality of their household to have an income. And so Anne was very understanding, especially as my travel picked up with work and then, the school portion, but certainly with work, it was picked up in a lot of travel. And she was very supportive of that as well. So, yeah. And then when we started having kids, then it became a juggling act. And I think like most families, I mean, the relationship you have is important, but it also comes down to your support system. And we were very fortunate to have my family nearby. And so they were the backup plan for, babysitting or for delivery or sports or whatever. So that kind of helped keep things on the rails as I was pursuing, a few different facets in life. So
it takes a village. It takes a village.
It takes a village. Yes.
Well, and as you well know from my dad's background, et cetera, right? It's the various things. It's the decision to raise your kids on a farm, right? And there's things that you learn from that you couldn't overtly do, right? It's so good on you and good on her.
I must share a story. Can I share a story about your dad? And
yeah, absolutely.
So your dad was an awesome guy to work with because I worked with him as he was a client for us. And anyway, we were at the Canadian Seed Trade Association meeting, and your mom was there.
Yep.
And I sat with them for the banquet, and we're sitting there, and your dad said, "How's it going?" I said, "Well," I said, "it's crazy right now. Like it is really busy, but I can see an opening. I think it's going to calm down pretty soon." And your mom rolled her eyes to the back of her head and she goes, "I've been listening to that and hearing that for 36 years," she said.
I could see it. I could see it. I can visualize that clearly.
Yeah,
Yes. I'd say it's the same too, because he's retired now and I think he's busier than he's ever been with all similar to yourself, volunteering his time to various other things. If you're in it, you're in it, right? So
that's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, and he enjoys it, and I know you do too. So, but you mentioned it, you touched on he was a client, my dad, Len. So talk about that because you kind of took, I wouldn't say it's a big departure, but like talk about your jobs. You mentioned a couple right after university or while you were still doing your master's, but how did that parlay itself into bridge communications and the advertising world?
So, I kind of took a view of my career, as how do you learn and how do you take advantage of learning opportunities and give everything of what you have while you're with the company you're with. And so I had the opportunity to work with Hertz, and I mentioned I was kind of headhunted into with ISK Biosciences. So I was there for a few years, and as I was finishing up my master's, the agency we had was Bridge Communications, and they had some expansion opportunities and some new client opportunities, and they needed some additional support and client support, and somebody that also recognized and knew the marketplace and could relate with the client and with farmers. And so we started talking more so, and I thought that would be a tremendous learning opportunity and an opportunity for me to apply what I had learned thus far, and what I applied and learned through school and that kind of thing. So that turned into becoming a member of the Bridge team, and that kind of parlayed itself into also a minority shareholder position as we move forward in that. And it was that was actually a very an outstanding time for me because I had the chance to work with a lot of different clients in a lot of different geographies, both across Canada and into the United States, and worked on crops that I didn't necessarily had, but where a lot of the principles are the same, how to reach a grower, how to communicate all. And so that was really a foundational time in my career, I would say, in terms of those growth, learning, and application opportunities. And I got to work with some great people, not only in the business like yourself and Brian Clausen and Linda Perry and others, but I really got to meet some good clients that become lifelong friends as well. So.
Yeah, it really does give you, I guess, just a broader perspective on the various challenges that lots of different companies have. And like you said, it was probably the first time I touched U.S. work as well, which, likely had something to do with me now down here for over 20 years. But I remember a story of that I told my dad about you because you actually were my boss there, and I went home and I was talking about you, and I thought, I was pretty good at that age, like anyone does at that late 20s age. And I came home and I was like, this Steve Denise, my God, this guy does the work of like 5 people in a day. Because at the time you were writing, you were kind of general management, you were strategic lead, you were agronomist, all these things. And I was like, oh my God, like, how does anyone keep up with this guy? And my dad just laughed and just said, live and learn, live and learn. So you were great, whether you knew you were a role model at that time or not. You were a good one. So,
Well, I
and
appreciate
I've
that.
not slowed down. You get a lot done in a day, Steve. You get a lot done in a day. So eventually, the bridge crew, you being a business owner, decided to sell, and this is you sold to, maybe you didn't realize at the time, a unique group, Venture Communications. They were called. I don't even know if they're still around, to be honest. But talk about that experience, decision to sell, how you parlayed that into the next part of your career, but also, I guess, the unique person that you got to negotiate with.
Yeah, so it's the decision to sell was really driven by the fact that the two majority shareholders, Brian Sturgeon and Dave Bannister, who were great guys in their own right, and just outstanding experience, and had worked in the industry for a long time, and they were at that point where they were ready to move on to the next phase of their life, and to retire. And so we had discussions, and it wasn't in at that point. I did not have an interest in owning the whole business or being in a majority position, and didn't have the means, quite frankly. So because we had other things on the horizon from a farm perspective that were maybe should have been less priority, but they were higher priority. But anyway, so the decision to sell was also driven in large part because we had an opportunity to work with Venture on a pitch for a large client. And because they were going through a reorganization after two companies coming together. So all of the agencies that were involved with both companies were having to pitch if they wanted to have any of the business. And Venture was working with the company at the other side at that time, which was Rome Planck, and they approached us about working together on a pitch, and we got together and saw some mutual interest, and so we did that. We were unsuccessful in that bid for various political reasons, but at the end of the day, there was interest on their part and interest on our part, and so we ended up selling the business to Venture. And the principal there was Arlene Dickinson, and in Canada, people will know her as being on the Dragon's Den. And Arlene was also a very driven person. She was a very astute business person, and she had started from the ground up. Like she literally started with nothing and built up that business. And so I worked with Bridge and then Venture for 3 years. Dave and Brian had departed the business, and I worked there for 3 years, and then on a contract. And then I was really literally ready to sign the contract, and then I got a call from a headhunter, and there was a seed business that was looking for somebody that they were not doing well, and they were looking for somebody to come in and help rebuild it and take a leadership role in the business. And that really tugged at my heartstrings as a corn and soybean producer. And so that's when we moved over into a role with Pride Seeds. So
yes. And then I guess to get current, how did from Pride to Maizex, how did that go about, and to get you where you're at now?
Yeah, so I was with Pride for 14 years, and honestly, I could have stayed there the rest of my life. I had an awesome team. I had we had grown the business, and we had moved it into third place in Canada, and which I think nobody expected. And so that was for me personally, that was a big deal. But we had a tremendous team that was involved in doing that, right? And so anyway, I was coming off as being president of the Canadian Seed Trade Association, and got involved in some issues there over the next couple of years, including on the seed treatment front, and that took up a great deal of time. But I got into some discussions with Dave Bowdy, who was the founder and owner of Maizex Seeds, and Dave had built a very successful independent seed business. He was working towards a succession plan. Which because they didn't have any kids that were interested in taking over the business, and there was a couple of companies on the horizon that were interested in perhaps working with Maizex, and I felt at my stage at Pride that I'd done a lot of heavy lifting there. I felt in a way, for anybody else to move up in the company, I was one of the roadblocks, so to speak, because I wanted other people to have an opportunity, and I really wanted one more challenge and another opportunity to learn. And so that's when that's when I moved over to Maizex and took on a very similar role to what I did at Pride, which was overseeing the sales, marketing, and product. And so that also afforded me the opportunity to go through a joint venture experience when Maizex formed a joint venture with, at the time it was like Co-op Federate, now it's Solio Agriculture. Yeah. And that was actually a very interesting process, but it was a very smooth process because we all had the same goals at the end of the day. And so then it was a question of how do you fit the businesses together, a lot of time spent on how do you put the teams together. Where did we need to expand to take advantage of opportunities? And so, yeah, that's taken up my time here the last few years.
There's a theme here, Steve. You obviously like a challenge.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think the fact that you said that you felt yourself possibly being a barrier to others moving up in the company, I think also just speaks to yourself, right? And also self-awareness of recognizing that and clearing the way for others to kind of take those jobs. So again, good on you.
Well, it's so my thesis paper was actually, when I did my master's, was on life cycles in businesses, and the different roles and different leadership roles, and the different processes required at different phases, and so that was also a factor, because I realized what part of the business I felt the most comfortable in, which is really, let's take something and let's start the hockey stick up, right? And what do we got to do that? And I wanted also the opportunity to move through that initial phase when you're going from an owner operator into more of a corporate climate. And so, yeah, that kind of puzzle all fit together.
Yep. Well, again, I see so many parallels with kind of your life and career with again my dad, and then later in life, all of a sudden he gets the offer to go to China and run a seed company. So I could see that in your future.
No, it's my wife and I have had one rule throughout the career, and that rule is, I'll do anything, but it's happening from Chatham. So
There you go.
Not many people in the world would want to say that, Brad.
There's good dirt there. There's good dirt there, or soil.
That's right.
I can't call it dirt.
Yeah.
That's a bad word. Well, I was trying to think. The best of friends are those that we could edit this out because it's not a great statement, but the best of friends are those that you have blackmail on.
There you go.
Right? And that means you've done things together and had a good time, maybe. And we've had many good times, but honestly, I don't know if anyone has blackmail on you, which means that I know you like to have a good time here and there, but always above board. And maybe
yes,
and you've done a really good job of that.
I did all my blackmail activities probably in first year university, and then learned the lesson from there.